I felt during those times, right? I was like, oh, she just doesn't care. It's like that wasn't the case. She was unable to. And now that she has the ability to do so, she does consistently because she's like, wow, what a gift that I can like show up for my sisters in this way.
That is Brinn Flagg, the guest for today's episode. In today's episode, you'll hear Brinn share the story of how she struggled to empathize with a youngest sister who was using drugs. Not an easy topic to discuss in a public forum. Join me in holding space for Brinn to reflect honestly. Welcome to the journey of realizing empathy.
I think we all have experienced a moment in our lives when we suddenly empathize with somebody we previously did not by experiencing a moment of realization. One where we went, aha, oh, or maybe even burst out with laughter concerning something we either did not or had incorrectly assumed to understand and appreciate enough. While these realizations can sometimes be had in a few minutes, it can also take years. In fact, it may never happen. It is a seemingly simple yet complex and lifelong process of realizing empathy that I wish to explore in all of our episodes. Hey there, listener. My name is Slim. I help startup founders in their maturation as a leader and a CEO by helping them confront themselves in a true mirror. And I believe few things serve as a truer mirror than the challenges we face in our interactions with other people. The Journey of Realizing Empathy is a show where we explore how our challenges with other people can ultimately serve as a true mirror that helps us mature as leaders and human beings. In each of our episodes, we host a guest who tells a story of a time in their life when they struggled to empathize with one or more people until a series of realizations moved them to empathize with those very people. Welcome, Brinn.
Hey, how are you? Super excited to be here.
Thank you for being on the show. Would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Brinn Flagg. I'm the CEO and founder of Awen, and we help support the loved ones of substance users. So we are in the process of building a digital platform, which will encompass a referral network, peer-to-peer support, and group meetings. We think it's really important that the loved ones of this community get the help that they need.
Absolutely. And before we begin, I want to make sure that I fully and once again acknowledge how much I personally appreciate for you coming on the show. I think we live in an era where the word empathy has somewhat become weaponized. And it's much easier to publicly talk about how much empathy we have and how wonderful of a people we are than to vulnerably disclose times in our lives where we struggled with empathy. So in my mind, it's a small act of bravery that you're practicing today. So for that, I really appreciate you for coming on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really do think that the work around empathy and the conversations that we're having around empathy, that needs to happen. So I appreciate that you're doing this and really happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we start the story, just to frame the conversation around which relationship that we're going to be talking about today, can you briefly introduce the relationship in which we'll be kind of focusing on today?
Sure. So I'm going to be talking about my relationship with my youngest sister, Carly, who has been in recovery now for 6 years, but has struggled her entire life with different substance uses and getting to the point where I have empathy for her now, or to the point where I finally started to understand the disease and what she was going through. That took us a really long time to get there. But again, I think it's an important component to start having around the relationships around substance use too, and that type of empathy that needs to go into this area specifically.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So thank you for bringing on this particular topic on the show. So take us back to a moment where you would like for this story to begin.
Let me think about that. It was probably in my early 20s. Carly was in her late teenage years. And I think it was the beginning of, I would call it the downward spiral towards it getting so bad that she was going to have to go to treatment. I think we could start the story there. I grew up in this really happy, close-knit family, and this kind of rocked us in a way that was confusing.
What was the contrast? Give us a little bit of an understanding of the contrast.
Our parents are together still. It's me, Carly, and Haley. She's my middle sister. Again, just like super comfy, cushy life. We got everything we needed and wanted. All the love that we could ever get from my parents. They were super supportive of the things we wanted to do. We're all artistic in our own way. Carly sings. My background's in fine arts. Haley is like an award-winning horseback rider. So we all have our sort of creative outlets, and my parents were so encouraging of that. And so when you go from that real support network and being there for one another, and then all of a sudden stuff starting to happen with Carly that we ignored for a little bit because maybe it was just her teenage years, she's rebelling, to wreaking havoc on the family, you start to not only not understand, but be pissed off. You're like,
when you say wreaking havoc, meaning?
Yeah, it just, things started to become a problem when she couldn't really get through the end of her high school years, failing classes, not showing up, barely graduating. The track was that she needed to go to college, which was just our family's way of saying, this is how you get to the next step. We're going to help you get there. There's your footsteps, follow them. And so for her, barely making it into a school and then getting to said school, failing out of said school, moving back in with my parents, and it started getting worse from there, where we all felt pretty helpless in the situation. I knew some other things were going on. Nobody was really listening to me about it.
When you say not listening to you about it, what kind of things were they listening to?
I knew that there was some other things going on, in that I couldn't imagine she wasn't using or partaking in drug and alcohol abuse, because how could she do this to our family? Meaning fail out of college when my parents were giving us all of these opportunities. How could she move back home and crash the car that my parents let her use? And the list can go on and on. And so I knew it was more than that. My parents really didn't want to take a look at it. We didn't know enough also. On my father's side of the family, there was definitely alcoholism, and nobody talked about it.
Oh, so it was kind of a taboo subject. That must have made it quite difficult to sort of broach that up.
Yeah. When I went away to college, recognizing that some people take it to an extreme and others don't need to do. And so when I saw Carly really going to that extreme, I was like, there's something else going on here. And they didn't want to look at it. And I think that is tough to recognize too, that maybe there is something going on here, and maybe it has something to do with what's happened in our previous families too. My father's parents. Go ahead.
When you say your previous parents, meaning?
My father's parents struggling with alcoholism, and then not making a connection to maybe this disease really carries over into different generations, and acknowledging that and saying, we can get through this because it is an illness. We didn't even know where to start with that. That didn't come till many years later.
So before you arrived at your own guesses or hunches about where this may be coming from, what was that journey for you? Because I would imagine in the beginning, you may also feel pissed about your own sister. Like, why aren't you more grateful? A normal human being could very well feel that way. Like, you should have everything you want. Why are you making a mess of it? What was that journey? Could you talk a little bit about that?
It was exactly that. It was, our parents did everything for us. Like, how can you be so ungrateful, and you're taking advantage of their time and their money and their house? How are you doing this to other people, to me, to Haley, to your friends, right? Your friends are no longer around because you're shitty to them. And everybody feels this way that is struggling with their loved ones going through this journey. I've heard this a million times in so many meetings from so many people. And until you get to the point where you're like, oh, they weren't doing it to me. They weren't, they really couldn't help it. They were sick. and are still sick.
They didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And in the interest of being a little more real and human about the caregiver struggle, would you be willing to talk a little bit about what emotions you felt in that place before you had the realization that there may be something else going on?
Frustrated. Annoyed would be like a low-key version. I think I was, this is a tough one to say, but I was really disgusted because I love my sister. And I was, it was really, and she would say this, it was disgraceful. Just the things that she was, again, not doing to my parents, but her actions felt so, let's just say, gross, between selling things that were theirs. We would have to hide our belongings if we came home. Like, that is tough stuff to have to go through with your family and be like, I am so disgusted by your actions. And for me, I couldn't handle those feelings anymore. I would not show up at gatherings. Again, we're really close knit and we all live in proximity of one another. So it was not rare for us to have dinners every couple of weeks, if not like once a weekend. And I was like, I'm not going to come to that. And I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that I'm not coming to it is because I'm disgusted by my sister now.
Oh, I see. So you're no longer living with your parents. Your sister was living with your parents. And from time to time, you would have dinner together because you're close enough physically. But then in this case, if you go back, you would have to confront your sister. And that's not a very comfortable situation to be in. So you would naturally avoid that kind of confrontation. Is that what you mean? Yeah. That's very human. But by the way, thank you so much for being honest about the disgust part. Because they can coexist, right? So when we love somebody, it's not like we don't love them because we're disgusted. It feels disgusting because we love them.
I think it's just, it was hard.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your willingness to disclose that emotional aspect of it. So you were right out of college at that time, or?
Yeah, I was right out of college. Yeah.
Got it. And then what happened?
So I think then, as many stories also go, Carly had to hit the rock bottom. And I remember getting a phone call from a childhood friend from my hometown. And it was really early in the morning. I was in Brooklyn, which is where I live. And she said, oh, Bill, another person from our high school who was an ex-boyfriend of hers, Bill called me. He's a cop now. He was at your house, your parents' house. Carly's going to the hospital. And I'm like, what? What's going on? Call my parents. And Carly had overdosed in their house. And they still were like, not getting it. They thought she had a seizure. And he had called my friend saying, I was just at the Flags and Carly overdosed and she's on her way to the emergency room. That was tough. Yeah. And I called my parents and they said, yeah, we didn't know, but she was overdosing on heroin. And if she wasn't at my family's home, though, they heard her collapse in her bedroom. And that's when they found her. And that was the beginning of the real work to get her help and treatment. And yep, it was a long road even from there, because she said she remembers lying in that bed. And as many people who are struggling with this disease would also recall going, when can I get out of here just so I can go use again? And so she knew that wasn't the real rock bottom, but it was one of them. And then it took us, let's say, another 4 years and a multitude of different types of treatment and different facilities to get her to a place where she finally really got the help that she needed and deserved.
What was it like for you to witness that 4-year journey?
I remember feeling so sad and really fearful. And again, I was close enough in proximity at the time to get in the car as soon as I heard to drive up to the hospital. My middle sister was in Philly and I was talking to her the whole way. And she just said, I'm not going to come. I'll come this weekend. The fear was really there because I didn't know if this was the time that she was going to be ready to get the help that she had needed. My parents were still in a little bit of denial. They were confused and embarrassed. The text change started happening. One of my best friends from growing up, her mother was the emergency room nurse. So it's like in a small town, everybody knew, again, as this close-knit family that seemingly had everything.
Yes.
It was embarrassing to feel like, what did we do for this to happen? So that was really challenging, I think, for all of us. The embarrassment. Carly was embarrassed too, but I think, again, because she was sick, she was ready to go use again, because I just want to get out of this room with these people because I'm so uncomfortable and crawling out of my skin, which is the reason the disease manifested in that way in the first place. It's the substance use and the alcohol, those are not the problems. Really, the problems are the underlying things that make people turn towards those. And we just didn't see it, or maybe we did see it and it was too much, again, for my parents to say, but we've done everything we could do for these kids and still have really low self-esteem or not good enough. That was hard for them, I think, to understand and swallow and recognize that those were the reasons why Carly was abusing drugs and alcohol.
Like, I've done the best I could possibly do. And if that somehow yields a result that I don't deem in alignment, that often translates to, then I am not enough.
Right.
I haven't done enough. So now my identity is also hurt, right? So I could imagine this must have been very difficult for your parents to confront.
Oh, yeah. I think that doesn't go away as a parent. And ultimately, we had a lot of work to do as a family. And I would say that it gave us a lot of opportunity to get even closer than we already were. And really confront all of those things within ourselves as individuals. And then as a family to say, now we got to step up and do the work as individuals to make sure that we're all supporting not just Carly, but all of us as a family unit. And I can say today, they're my best friends, all of them, my whole family. It's amazing to be able to say that.
Yeah. And it's like the way muscles grow. We intentionally hurt our muscles and then they recover. Yeah. And then now it becomes even stronger than it ever was. This irony of how could hurting something make something stronger? But it apparently does.
Yeah.
So during that 4 years, it sounds like this was beyond just the incident with Carly. There's a kind of family transformation going on. Could you talk a little bit more to that part?
Yeah. So I think once we realized that she really needed help and treatment, again, the work that I'm doing is because we didn't have the help that we needed. So the industry is confusing and complex. You don't know what type of treatment your loved one is going to need or where they should go and what's the best place and what's insurance going to cover, what's it not going to cover. Do we pay out of pocket for the better treatment facility? The list is on and on.
Yeah.
And that is a challenging topic in and of itself. The work that we're doing is really going to help mitigate that. And I know a lot of people in the space are doing the same things. But first and foremost, it was confusing as to what she needed next or what the next steps were. And then once we finally got her to a place that we felt was going to be really helpful, then you start thinking about, okay, so she's safe. She's working a program. She's in a treatment facility. Now, how does the family start to heal? And we would go and visit her on Sundays to this one particular place that she stayed at for the longest period of time. And we would do a group meeting with the other loved ones that had family there. And again, there was shame and embarrassment around it. So my dad did not want to talk about it. And my mom had nobody to talk to either because she doesn't want to tell people at work. It's hard to tell the rest of our family what's going on. I felt a little bit more supported by my friends. I've always been an open book. So I was getting to the point where at least I was talking about it with people, but I was still really mad that it was happening in the first place. And I had to drive up every Sunday and go to these group meetings and talk about my feelings. And so we would do the group meeting with the rest of the family, and then we would have a meeting with our own family and a therapist. And we needed more therapy than just the 1 hour on Sunday. And once Carly finished her treatment there, and they said the best place for people to find recovery is Portland, Maine. And we have a connection in Maine through our family. So we were like, okay, Maine.
You were in, where were you before talking about Maine?
Carly's treatment facility was in Connecticut.
Got it. Is that where you live, or?
We're in New York, so very,
Okay,
this, what is it? What's New England-ish area?
yeah, the tri-state East Coast.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, because we're close, they were like, she's got to go far away. Her recovery is going to work if she's a little bit further away from you guys. So you could maybe think that she should go to California. And my mom was like, absolutely not. She can't go to California.
Too far.
So Maine was the closest, furthest away spot.
Did they say why it was more effective if they were far apart?
So people in the recovery and treatment industry talk about people, places, and things. So once you're finally ready to make some changes, those are the things you have to change. So Carly couldn't go back home and live with my parents. She couldn't go back to New York, where the group of people that she had surrounded with herself with at that point, she couldn't be around those people anymore. The car happened to be a big part of how she was able to get around and use when she wasn't working. So part of the deal was that she couldn't have a car for a year. She had to really recognize and work on how she was going to start supporting herself without my parents. And the things, which is that you have to rebuild your community that doesn't involve the substances. And so Portland it was, and she's never looked back. The community here is vibrant and vast and supportive. And she started doing a 12-step program. She got a sponsor. She's got many sponsees now. She spoke at meetings. We would come up for those big events. We started going to meetings ourselves in and around our community. And I personally started thinking about how I was going to go through my healing process. And I'm building the company I'm building because I found that there really is not support in the way that I needed it. I'm a big AA and Al-Anon fan, but the meetings that I attended in my area just didn't feel like they were my people. And so I'm really trying to build a community that's conducive to those folks that say, I don't want to do a 12-step program. It's nice to know it, or it's interesting for me to learn. And I've done the 12-step and again, great information for people to have and tools in their toolkit. But I want to build something that's a little bit different for folks who don't want to do those type of meetings.
I think it's one of those things where it's very personal, what we're talking about, and it has to feel right. We have intuitions as human beings. And when something is off, something is off. I don't care what statistics or so-called scientific evidence that you put in front of me. If something doesn't feel right, it just doesn't feel right. Yeah. And the power is that you can find something that does feel right. Mm-hmm. There are choices that we can make differently. And when we find that we know intuitively, oh, see, there was something missing over there. I found it, so I'll stick with this. Thank you very much. Other people may resonate with that. I'm not saying this is somehow wrong or bad or whatever. It's just not for me.
Yeah.
And there's another option to be had when we increase the number of choices people can make. Mm-hmm. I think the more people can specifically benefit. So that definitely resonates. What are some things you learned in those 4 years that you keep deep in your heart these days?
Well, I definitely learned about addiction as a disease. That was a major turning point, I think, when we started thinking about it in that way.
Wait, what was the other alternative as opposed to a disease?
Just that this was her choice. She was choosing to be
yes. The blaming aspect of it.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden, that's a big shift. Communication around such a touchy subject. Again, my family was, did we really want to go there? My mom had to be like, this does make sense. Her grandparents are alcoholics. And other people in the family, my dad is a really big family. That's going to be a difficult conversation, but we've got to talk about it and acknowledge it. So learning about communication with one another in that way, and learning how it was okay that we were all healing in different ways too. And now, many years later, recognizing that when we do have to heal in different ways, now around different subjects, we lose a job, where we lose a partner, whatever's happening within the family, and understanding how that particular family member is going to heal and how they need support. We learned all of those things. So now I know I can show up for Haley, my middle sister, if she's going through something in a very different way than Carly may need.
Right.
Or my mom, that my mom needs way more support and needs a phone call every day from me because she's going through something challenging. And that was what she needed to hear from her two other kids, knowing that they were okay, because her focus was so much on making sure Carly was getting safe.
Yeah. When we have children, it feels as if our heart is running around.
But my mom will always be like, oh, when you have kids, you'll understand. I'm like, okay, all right.
Let's pause there for a second and make sure that we acknowledge how much I appreciate your willingness to learn the nuances and subtleties of how to support the individuals differently.
Yeah.
Because we either assume or somehow we're misled to believe there's a one size fits all. Or we'll just tell them it's going to be fine and pat on the back, and somehow magically everything will become rosy. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. When rubber meets the road, there are complex nuances that can only be learned by taking that initiative. And sometimes we don't even know how we need to be supported.
No.
And that's a level of awareness that must be cultivated and developed, because who spends time thinking about what are all the ways that I need to be supported? Nobody. So talk a little bit about that process of learning how you can become sensitized to the way each individual needs support.
Yeah, it's definitely trial and error. I think the example I can just hone in on is that I think my middle sister, who is also now getting her master's in psychology and addiction specialist, which was her way of being like, I want to learn all about this. I want to help people too. She's a referral director at a company now that helps people get, placed into treatment programs. I'm building the company I'm building. Like, we really care about this community. And so she was like, I'm diving in, and I'm on the phone with Carly every day, and I'll go up to Maine and I'll be a part of that community, entrench myself in it. And it took me a little bit longer to get there. I, again, had to take that step back and process on my own. And Haley will recall now, she was mad at me for that, right? Where I would, I'm not going to come up to Portland this weekend. I need to do some self-care and stay in Brooklyn and do the things that I need to do, whatever. And she would be like, you're a bitch.
I appreciate the honesty that you have in your sisterhood.
Yeah, she is. She doesn't sugarcoat anything, Haley. It was like, you're a bad sister. And it took us a while to get to the point where now she can say, I know how you process. You should go and do that. I'm here when you're ready. But for her, she's like, I'm confronting it now. We're talking about it now. And I can be blunt and I still love you. I'm like, okay.
It sounds like problem solving is a major part of how she wants to express support for other people.
Yes. Yeah. So she's gone and done that with her career. And I'm super proud of her. But yeah, I get a little bit more quiet and have to contemplate, and I want to talk about it. And Haley's, we need to confront this head on.
We got to eliminate this.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And Carly is, I think maybe she's in both camps, right? She's like, we can address this now, but let's talk it through. And she's very gentle. And that's how she is with her sponsor.
Has she always been like that? Or is it because through the processes, she's learned to be like that?
She's learned to be like that. She's so comfortable in her own skin right now. Wow. And it really did take her going through this and struggling with drugs and alcohol to get to a place where she feels really good about who she is and can be proud of who she is and the work that she's done, where prior to any of that stuff happening to her and her family, or the disease really rearing its head, she never felt proud. She never got the grades that Haley and I got. She was always the failure in the family. She never looked like Haley and I did. She never got boyfriends. List goes on and on. And she disappointed the family all the time. And now it's not like that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it resonates so deeply. In one of the conversations I had at one point in time, there was somebody who was judging millennials. It was a very popular thing to do. Oh, millennials are entitled, or whatever, label you want to put on it. And one of the things that people often miss is when you're growing up and you're told you can be anything you want. Sounds wonderful, right? On the surface, it's like the most positive thing anybody could say to you. But the flip side we are sometimes unaware is when you're told you can be anything you want, somehow our human psychology says, unless we become something amazing, then we're nothing. Right? It's as if anything is within our grips. It makes logical sense, right? If literally everything and anything is within our grasp, why would you settle for anything less than the most amazing thing in the entire world? Other than that, it just seems like a total failure or sort of you're short on something. That's a lot of pressure to be had on you, especially as a young person. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, that was totally it. It was like my parents said, we built this life for you guys.
Right.
So,
the sacrifice we have made.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And what the shift has now been is that we're just so happy that you guys are healthy and doing the things that make you feel fulfilled in life. That was all we could have asked for, but we didn't know. We thought we were supposed to push you. We thought you're supposed to go to college and you have to have this track. And that wasn't the case for Carly. And she has gone on to get her bachelor's. And so she has gone back to school to be a counselor, though, a drug and alcohol counselor. And she wants to get her master's.
Proud of her.
And they're like, even if you didn't do that, now we do a lot of that. We're like, but we support you, but no need. If you're happy, whatever you want to do, funny.
I mean, this basically impacted your entire family in a very transformative way. You were just talking about how it had impacted you, how it had impacted Haley, but the impact on your parents, that sounds like it was a huge part of it. Could you talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so I think they each had to find their own ways of healing also as individuals. So I think the community also talks a lot about faith, which is whatever you want it to be, which is also great. For my father, it really meant getting back to his roots, which was Catholicism, and going back to church. And that was not from my mother. And she had to, maybe prior, because she said, I don't want to raise our children Catholic. And he was okay with that. We didn't participate in going to church. And when this sort of happened and he's like, I got to get back to something, she's okay, you go do that. And it's okay. And I'm okay with that. And my mom found a group, another family group near where we live. And it was run by a woman who had lost a child. So there was other just parents in that group that had, lost other children. And I think that's where my mom finally found the people that she needed, was within that group of people. And it was okay that they did those things separately. I think they had to process differently, and they love each other and support one another. But that was how they got through it. And I think that's how they still work through it.
And this is obviously a complete conjecture and a guess, but it sounds like she was grieving.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't the life that she thought she would for her children. I think that they definitely had years where they were, this is your fault. No, it's your fault. If we didn't do this, if you didn't do that thing, if you never pushed her to do this, if you were around more, right? A lot of that for the two of them, and working through that and coming out the other side and saying, oh, it was nobody's fault.
Yeah.
And you don't really get to that point until you get in a group setting and start talking to people who have lived this experience. We had it. We didn't know where to go to do it. And then once we found people in our own ways and said, oh, wow, there are people that are like us and went through this.
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a really important point, which I think is that sort of feeling of deep isolation, where it's as if I'm the only person who has ever made this quote unquote mistake. And it's all really my fault. And even when you're bickering and fighting and pointing fingers at the other side, the aspect of that which makes it more difficult is internally you admit some part of it may have been your fault. So when somebody pokes you, it actually hurts. And the more likely that you're not going to go there, and instead you're going to deflect that on somebody else, because we just don't know what else to do. We just feel stuck. We have no other choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What emotions do you feel at this particular moment?
Oh, man, when I think about my parents and what they've gone through with us and how they just never stop showing up, I'm just like full of gratitude. Actually, so lucky to have them as my parents, and so lucky that they again, together said, we're going to get through this as a couple, as a partnership. Oh my God, yeah, sometimes I hate you. And sometimes I'm so mad at you. And
Yeah.
so much. And I'm going to be here and I'm not going anywhere and I'm staying and I'm going to sit in this with you. Wow. Like that fills me with gratitude for them and this experience that we've all been through. I think Carly would say, drugs and alcohol saved my life. They got her through a time where she was not even able to be in her body or with herself. So they got her through that point and now become like the woman that she is. That's profound and amazing too. For all of us to be able to say that, like, man, drugs and alcohol did something so profound to our family that now we're all working towards a goal of helping other people get the help that they need. It's pretty cool.
And the analogy that popped into my head is that of a crucible, right? When you want to forge a metal into a valuable and useful shape, for example, it goes through this excruciating process of getting melted down to basically this liquid form of metal. And the only way in which that liquid form can go through a process where it becomes the sword or whatever new form that it takes, it requires this support structure called the crucible to hold it in place and accept it as it is. Crucible is not trying to change you into some other shape. That will happen later through whatever you go through. All I'm doing, I just need to hold you as you are in this place until you get to go through the process of becoming some other form through a transformative process. Does that resonate?
Yeah, that is great. What an awesome like metaphor. You're right. My parents just held the space for all of us and continued.
What do you think you learned about your parents through this process that you didn't know prior?
Oh man, I think that they're people. You're like, oh.
What were they before people?
They are gods and goddesses, right? Like they are the everything. They know all the things. They know what's best. They're going to save everything if I need it to be saved. I mean, we're all adults at this point, and sometimes we still look to our parents to have all the answers or for the best advice or save me from whatever pain I'm in that day. And they still do those things. But then also just being like, oh, you're just another person doing the best that they can. My parents did the best that they could.
Yes, they did.
And I like think about other people in that way now too. And I'm like, oh, we're all just trying the best that we can. Not only were they trying their best, but they, just like all of us, like we're learning as we go. They didn't have all
exactly.
And I was like, wait a second, you guys don't know what to do in this situation? Like, I'm confused.
And you call yourself parents? Who qualified you for this? Didn't you like take a kind of a exam that you make sure you're certified parenting, all that kind of stuff?
Exactly. It was crazy. So yeah, to see them as humans is interesting.
And what do you think was the significance now that you see the part of them who's also human? What is the significance and meaning of that for you?
Oh, that they had the stuff that they went through as children.
You learned about that as well.
Yeah. Where it was like, you just don't think about your parents as kids going through childhood, let's call it trauma. Like, and then when you start having to communicate and talk about those things, because that's what's coming up in a lot of therapeutic forums when you're trying to heal, you're like, oh, that's what kids want? What? Oh, your parents did that stuff to you and your parents didn't show up, or they did show up in this way? Oh, okay. Now we get why you've done the things that you've done, or that you like struggle with this thing. Oh, interesting. Okay. And acknowledging that in that way, I think was helpful for all of us.
And it starts to make sense.
Right.
The things that didn't make sense. You don't start by necessarily not making sense, but you just assume that things are in order. And then something goes out of order and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. how can things go out of order when I just assumed everything was in order? And then the kind of reflection is like, oh, no wonder things got out of order.
Totally.
Wow. Let's also pause here and make sure that I personally acknowledge and appreciate how meaningful it must have been for you to be there for them.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, except for maybe it was later when it wasn't so much of a focus. Like we were focused on Carly for years, getting her help. And maybe it wasn't until she was safe and healthy and doing really well that my parents acknowledged that Haley and I holding it together or being present or showing up or being able to talk about it with them, that really meant something to them. And it wasn't until we were going to meetings later or going to therapy later as a family that they were able to acknowledge those things for us. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I forget now, because 6 years is a pretty good length of time for us to all still be working and healing towards it, but we're all in a good place. And let's just say it's out of the woods a little bit. I haven't thought about that for a while.
What emotions do you feel thinking about this right now?
I definitely feel comforted knowing that we've gotten through some stuff, are in a good place as a family. I feel relief that is not really there when the person is in active use, and it's not there when they're in treatment, and it is really difficult the first year of sobriety or getting over a hump. And still every day my mom will say something like, I don't take a phone call from her and I text her instead, and she's like, you know that I just need to make sure you're okay, like I'm still have PTSD, please.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Yes.
You gotta text me, call me at least once a day, and that is okay with me. It's okay with me, but that's still there for her. I feel okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I can still imagine how meaningful this must be to have your support on an ongoing basis. Because I think one of the things that you alluded to earlier is the shift in perspective of how you perceive your parents, not merely as parents or adults, but as human beings with their own vulnerabilities, with their own childhood, with their own insecurities, and all those quote unquote flaws that we would typically call it. But I don't necessarily think of them as flaws, as just memories. That's all it is. It's just
Fascinating.
Right? Does that resonate?
Yeah, totally. They had insecurities and struggled through things. I just didn't see it like that before.
Right.
They had it all together. They had arrived at this life as parents, and they both had careers and were supporting us and had the house, and the insecurities thing. They have those? That's weird.
Wait, what in particular about insecurities resonate with you?
Oh, just that the way in which they went through the healing process, right? So one had to do this thing and the other had to do the other thing, or the fighting that had happened prior. It was like, that was the shit that was probably coming up between them, just was articulating their insecurities about themselves as people and therefore as parents. Yeah, just never seeing them as people that had those vulnerabilities, really. And we all talk about that. That's amazing.
It is amazing. In some ways, I also guess that when they feel supported by your presence in this whole ordeal, it's the flip side of what you went through. Like maybe up until that point, they perceived you as merely children or merely my kids or my daughters. And then now all of a sudden they perceive you as adults who on equal grounds can support them just as they could support you guys. So now the strength doesn't have to come from within one's individual self. It can come from the relationship, the support that we have for one another. Does that resonate?
Yeah, totally. Like once in a while, she'll be like, oh, you're changing and growing and it's great. And so proud of you. But more of our conversations are about Haley and Carly, actually. And I wonder if Haley and Carly hear about me, right?
It's a complex web of relationships and support structures. But I mean, I had so much gratitude for your entire family for sticking through this, because it's really not easy. Not to trivialize this matter, nor to overly glorify it. I think it's also common for this to break families. That has happened. That's not something that's uncommon. So this isn't to say one is superior to another. It's just that this is the reality of things, and it's very difficult. And there is an appreciation and gratitude one can feel towards encountering a family who went through something very difficult and were thankfully able to come out the other end, having been able to provide greater support for one another.
Yeah, it's tough when I recognize that or see that, because when you go to support meetings, you hear so many stories. And sometimes the feelings that come up when I think about how lucky we are, sometimes I feel it's not shame, but it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me out. When you feel like you're not,
like survivor guilt?
A little bit.
Yeah, that's normal.
Like, I'm like, oh, Carly's doing so well and we're all doing so well because my parents stayed together, maybe because my family had the financial means to really help Carly get into the best treatment program and stay there past 28 days, because 28 days is just never enough. I could go on a rant about that, but
let's just say you have your opinions.
So I think what is that word that it's not regret, but it's, I guess it's guilt.
Yeah.
So that comes up often, and I try to, again, work a little bit of the tools that I have, or work a program a little bit and say, everybody's journey is different. This was yours. You're working towards helping other people because you had the opportunity to do so. And Carly's doing the same thing, right? Carly's giving back to the community because, man, she feels so much gratitude for how my parents supported her through this. And when she talks in meetings, she always says, I came from the most loving, supportive home. It wasn't about that. That's what she sort of hones in on. And I appreciate when she does that, because I think it gives people, a lot of people in that are similar to us feel the same way, because so many people in this community don't have support of,
right.
And that breaks my heart.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where when we acknowledge the privilege aspect of this, right? Like when you were talking about how you had a family that stuck together or had the financial means, there is no shame in admitting those privileges that you had. Does not diminish at all the struggle that you went through or the emotional turmoil that you all experienced, and the value and the level of appreciation that I believe every single one of your family members deserve for having come out the end the way you have. And I think it's one of those things where one case does not somehow become a reference point for another case to put them down or put anything on a pedestal. But I think it's very important to acknowledge what you've done. The modeling behavior in my mind that I feel very inspired by is I don't sense anywhere that you're taking this for granted.
No. Going back to what we were saying at the beginning of the conversation, this conversation that need to be happening around the word empathy, which is criticized right now. You can say the same thing for privilege. And I think
yes, precisely.
Willing to do it, because I don't know if there's like another way forward, but they're uncomfortable.
It is very uncomfortable.
So those are the other things that I think are important to acknowledge, is that we just got to keep talking about it.
Yeah. And another dimension also worthy of acknowledging is the fact that you have made a choice, specifically of taking responsibility for this disease to a certain degree, right? Because if you look at that statement on face value, that's a pretty heavy burden. I mean, like, it's one thing to say, oh my God, it was a handful to be able to help my own sister go through this. To be able to say, as if that wasn't hard enough, I'm going to go one step further and take greater responsibility. That's a lot of pressure that you're putting on your shoulders, right?
When I talk to other families, the most important aspect that people don't really recognize until later in the process of healing is that you can't take on your loved one's disease, and shifting the focus back onto yourself is insanely hard to do. And you mentioned it you're talking about your friend struggling. Like, how could you ever have possibly been like, no, I'm going to look at myself and how I'm showing up here, and take a step back from the relationship and say, no, I'll go do some work on myself. So the sooner loved ones can start saying to themselves, oof, it's really hard to say, but I can be happy even if my loved one is struggling, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And the more we can shift the focus that way, it's going to make some shifts in how we recover.
Precisely. And I think this circle back to the earlier statement we talked about parenting. The presumption that a lot of parents naturally have when they first have children is, I'm responsible for them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure they go to college. Every single thing actually goes beyond responsibility. It actually goes to guaranteeing results. I think that's where the jump happens a bit too far, because that's not in anybody's realm. Look at COVID situation. Can you, in this COVID situation, guarantee everybody's safety without locking them up in the basement and without taking some kind of extreme measures that really actually hinders their freedom? Could you actually guarantee the result? You just can't. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
And so the balance is very tricky. It's like, okay, I'm going to give them freedom. But then where does the boundary of my responsibility end? And where does the boundary of their responsibility begin? That's a very tricky, slippery slope, and sometimes very difficult to talk about. And I think it's one of those things where, in my eyes, you've taken the responsibility to go a step further. And you say, okay, the boundary of my responsibility goes a little bit beyond. And sometimes this is a kind of a sticking point for people, I think, very interested in social impact, is sometimes we feel like, oh, but I want to guarantee results.
Yeah.
Because that's a real thing. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and people, you definitely in the recovery community, you can't say that.
Right.
People are like, what do you mean? I'm showing up to this meeting and you're telling me to do all these things for myself, like the self-care and taking a step back from the loved one or cutting them off, and you're going to tell me that they might still sick?
Right.
Yeah, I love
so, okay, so 4 years of significant time with your sister. What are some things that happened after those formidable 4 years?
So when she finally moved to Portland and found her community here, it was like she found herself, right? The friend group was so important. These were people that were unlike people in her past, really understood her, who she was, show up for her constantly. That's pretty major, I think, for somebody who really struggled as a child to have friendships. That was really big for her. Her just being on her own too, I think, being like, okay, now I've got to find work and make rent. And my parents being afraid the whole time. They were like, we'll pay for rent. And like,
let me be the rock that I've always been.
Right. And people in our community were like, you can't do that. You can't do that for her.
I love her.
Yeah. But how's she going to do? Nope. Like, she has to figure it out now. And for Carly to say, I can step up now because of the work that I've done, like giving, now she's being able to give herself the validation that she's always wanted in the first place. So she's like, I can do it and I'm going to do it. And when I do it, holy shit, now, wow, I didn't think I could ever do that.
Yes.
So finding that the way in which she was going to procure work, be in touch with the friend group, have the support community here, and then ultimately saying, I want to give back. I want to help people go through this. And there's such a need for it. There's a need for it everywhere. But in Portland, there is just a really large population of people who are struggling. It's just a place that people come because there's so many facilities and sober living homes. And again, just the groups of people here that find one another is really important to people staying in recovery. And yeah, I think now she's looking at going back and getting her master's. And that's huge. Like, she never thought she would do something like that.
What emotions do you feel looking at her now, kind of getting to this point?
Just so proud. I mean, she's so, it's a kind of a lofty word, but she is enlightened, right? I call her for advice now.
Talk about on equal ground, supporting each other.
Totally. Show up, right? Just the way that I felt during those times, right? I was like, oh, she just doesn't care. It's like, that wasn't the case. She was unable to. And now that she has the ability to do so, she does consistently, because she's like, wow, what a gift that I can like show up for my sisters in this way.
Wow. Proud. I almost sense inspiration.
Oh, 100% inspired.
Any other emotions?
Content. I just am around her now, and we all feel safe. We have fun. We're like all really silly together. We all like deeply know one another. I am really able to show up as myself with both sisters. And yeah, sure, like we fight, but it's not
because we're sisters.
But it's like still fun. We're all just like making fun of one another and our idiosyncrasies, because that's the way in which we communicate now. We all talk about our feelings all the time, right? And that's pretty great.
Now, with all the therapy lingo, there comes your coping mechanism. I see it. That's your trigger, isn't it?
Totally. It's exactly that. Yeah.
So let's take stock of the contrast. So once again, these emotions that you felt in the past has no bearing on how you feel right now. But at the same time, I think these two feelings across time can coexist, right? So just to put it in contrast, there was a point in time when you felt disgusted by your sister. Yep. There's a point in time when you felt mad at your sister. A lot of unpleasant emotions you felt, but you were able to learn more about your parents, and that led you to see another side of them. And in some ways, it helped you empathize with them more greatly, right? I'm curious, there must have been other realizations similar to that with your sister that has helped you more greatly empathize with her. What are some realizations that you had?
I think there's something to be said about passing judgment was something that I had to really work through, because I was always judging Carly for not getting good grades, for not playing sports, whatever, or she was lazy. So I was always passing judgment, which meant when she was getting better and going through all of this and finding her community, it's the same thing. It took me a while to show up to those group meetings, look around the room, and not pass judgment on the father who left his wife and 3 kids at home because he was an alcoholic.
Right.
Yeah. Do that. Yeah. You know, there's some days that I have to check myself there, especially doing work with the types of people that I work with. It's hard for me to admit and say, but I'm like, wow, that is whatever story has come up, or I'm like, that's nothing I can relate to. And I'm like, oh, no, that's me. You got to check yourself on that. Judgment is just sometimes just for me, it's like it shows up as the mirror, right? I'm like, what is making... I'm judging this person. Like if I hold up the mirror, what is that indicating to myself that I've got to take a look at? What's the fear that's coming up around passing that judgment or inquiring as to why that person did the thing that they did or do the thing that they do? And yeah, that's a tough one that I feel still got to go work through.
Once again, until the day we die, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So to make it a little bit more concrete for us, what's an instance where you're like realize, oh, that's a mirror?
Maybe stuff around school. Maybe like people not having degrees. I'm like, oh, you don't have your bachelor's, or that's going to be tough for you. And then I'm like, okay, just rewind. Maybe the mirror is just saying, I guess you are still telling yourself the story that in order to be successful, you needed degrees. You needed that outside validation to tell you, to let you know or indicate to yourself that you could accomplish the things that you're accomplishing now. And it's not really true.
Your worthiness is somehow tied to the diploma that you receive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting one that's come up recently.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for being honest about that mirror mechanism. And I think it's also worth recognizing that this is a very hard ingrained one. And that's probably shared across many different people, many different countries for that matter. And especially in situations where they may not have such a well-established educational system, for them, the only thing they can model after is this current existing system. And they may be tempted to do just a copy version of this, when in fact, there may be ways to innovate on what it really means to be educated and to learn the things that are really required to mature and grow and develop and quote unquote, do the things that are successful, whatever that means. It's a whole another story about how you define what it means to be successful, right? Yeah. Yeah. So what were the realizations that made you come to that realization that, oh, this passing judgment is something that I need to work on? There was probably like one or more instances where you confronted something that made you realize.
I'll talk about a recent one. I've met somebody recently in the community here, and that person has been to jail. And I was like, that's screwed up. Again, like I can't relate. Wow, that's pretty crazy. That's pretty intense. And I remember talking to my mom about it and being like, yeah, it's interesting. This person has told me some stories and I'm clueless. I don't really understand. I don't know what to say to that person. And it makes me uncomfortable. Mom's like, you know how many times like we bailed Carly out so she didn't go to jail? You know how many people we paid off? Easily could have gone to jail for years. And I was like, oh, shit, she's right.
Wow.
And I was like, oh boy.
That's a pretty deep reckoning. In some ways, like the distinction between someone who's gone to jail and not gone to jail may simply be bail.
Right. Or a supportive family, right? Hearing from this person being like, oh no, my parents told me to rot in jail because they were so fed up with me.
Right. Intentionally, as if that was going to somehow make everything better.
And my parents just happened to say they didn't let that happen. They enabled, right? We could go down that rabbit hole too. But so I was like, and again, having the conversation with my mom, being a little tentative to even talk to her about that, just being like, oh, I wonder if she's going to pass judgment on this person that I'm talking about.
Ah, right.
And then for her to say, no, Brinn, like, we don't pass judgment here anymore because we're going to go. And I'm like, oh man, Mom.
You're right. Forgot about that.
Like for somebody who maybe would like years and years ago would have been like, oh yeah, don't get involved with that person.
Right.
Instead saying like, and look how far that person's come, just appreciate that. And I'm like, wow, my mom is also enlightened.
I can see you like this word, enlightened.
Funny.
But I mean, it's perspective, right? You're looking at this person from a particular perspective. And then the moment somebody shares a different perspective, and not just a random perspective, but one that actually resonates with you because of a shared experience you have with her, you can't deny now you see another side that you were previously, not because you're ignorant, not because you're stupid, simply because there was a focus that you had. And it was uncomfortable, which makes it even more difficult for a human being to shift perspectives or focus randomly, kind of like a deer in a headlight. Like I'm seeing this thing, it's right in front of my face. It's hard not to look at it. And it's not until your supporting peer is able to say like, all right, I know it's difficult to see this thing as a deer in headlight. Come over here. Let me gently nudge you in this direction. Remember that time that we can move slightly to the left and then you see another side of the same thing. You're like, oh yes, I remember now. Oh, I feel much, much more calm. I'm no longer a deer in headlight.
Yeah. Calm is a nice feeling too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always relief in that moment.
Yeah.
So tie it back to your sister for me. So these are instances with other people. What were some specific realizations with your sister that were similarly enlightening to you that really brought that contrast between the way you felt earlier in your life and now the way you feel about Carly?
I mean, this is, I think, one of the most challenging things that anybody could go through and overcome, if we want to say overcome, meaning she's in long-term recovery. How do you do that?
Yeah.
That's profound to me. And being able to look at her and being like, holy shit, that's so courageous and strong. And you're like, now you show up every day and do the work because it's what you choose to do that now. That is the realization to me there is that she is a powerhouse and can accomplish anything. Whereas I would have said 10 years ago, I'd be like, again, like the word lazy, being like, what is she's not going to do anything with her life. Also terrible to think that I thought that, but
it's real and it happens to many of them. But it sounds like you've come to appreciate the strength and courage of her character in a way that you were not able to in the past. Is that the transition? Hmm. Hmm. So was it because you were constantly like watching her going through this? What experiences do you think you had to go through to come to that realization?
Just the fact that she has moved the farthest away from my parents and is like thriving in a community is like a big deal. And
Say a little bit more. So what's the significance of you recognizing that she's moved far from the parents? What's the significance of that?
that she like made it, she was like, I can do this on my own. Where I think, again, as like supportive and wonderful as my parents are, they did a lot of like setting up for us in our early childhood so that nobody would get hurt, right? No, everybody was safe and taken care of. And so for her to be able to do that and be like, oh, I like got my own finances and I'm gonna figure out how to pay for school. And I'm like, damn, that's pretty good. I didn't pay for.
So let's put it a little bit more bluntly. You're impressed.
I'm impressed. Totally.
It's like the contrast is very specific and concrete. Well, when I was your age, I wasn't able to do those things. And you are doing it with flying colors. That is damn impressive.
Yeah.
Respect.
Right. That, and also I still really care about what people think of me. And what recovery does for a lot of folks is I am just who I am and that person is who they are. And I don't really care what they think about me because I'm all good over here. That, and when she said stuff like that to me, I'm like, wow, okay. That's impressive too to me because I still went through a lot of that. And just that I want everybody to like me and I want to impress other people. And Carly's just, I impress myself every day. So
I look at the mirror and go, Carly, you've come a long way.
Yeah, she does. I'm good. And then on days when it's not good, she's okay. I'll still say it to myself and still be like, okay, but I can feel this emotion. That's a lot of work to get to that point. And a lot of people don't get there. Pretty cool.
Well, let me first pause and acknowledge how honest you are about this aspect of your sisterhood. Because you're the oldest, right?
I'm the oldest, yeah.
So there's naturally going to be pressure. You supposedly should have everything in order, all the things figured out, know all those things and take care of your little siblings. But you've gone through a transitional period where really you're being equal to one another in some sense. Of course, there will be aspects that you're still the oldest sister, but by and large, there is this sort of equal footing of being each other's support, not simply being, I'm the only thing that everybody has to be supported against, and I can't count on anybody besides mom or something like that. So there is that sort of collegiality that is very powerful and very meaningful. And at the same time, it sounds like you're able to fully admit and acknowledge that you are just as able to draw inspiration and power and courage and support from your younger siblings as they are probably from you, and the same thing with your parents and vice versa. Right? Yeah. And the fact that you are able to admit, acknowledge, and appreciate those things, that is just beyond powerful. I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that first. And it also sounds like there is the societal expectations of where do you put your self-worth on? Mm-hmm. Because it's unclear. When we were growing up, it's the diploma, like what you were saying, and then it's the job that you get. And then once you get the job, it's the salary that you receive and the ranking that you arrive at. All those external, quote unquote, objective measures that you potentially could put your self-worth on. But then I think what you're getting at now is like, she's beyond that. Not necessarily in the sense that she doesn't need any validation, because all human beings need validation to a certain degree from some people that are near and dear to our hearts. But by and large, she's working actively in taking responsibility for, okay, where do I choose to put this on? I'm going to put it here and not there. And this is the anchor. This is the place where I'm going to put that on in situations where I receive feedback that I'm somehow off course. Then I'm going to actually listen to that and say, oh, did I? Oh, what happened? Give me some feedback, and I could course correct and get back online and really make sure that I'm progressing to become the person that I've promised myself that I'm going to become. Does that resonate?
Yeah, that's profound. I think you're totally on, nail on the head there.
Wow. And what emotions do you feel now reflecting on this conversation thus far?
oh, I just feel so excited about what's coming for all of us. That's a really nice feeling to have felt even in this crazy year. The year's been rough. And so to feel even just a little bit of excitement. So yeah, so excited and joyful right now is like really nice,
Yeah, especially because of the extended range of responsibility that you've taken on for yourself to start up this company and then take your next step of the journey. In some ways, I think you need all the power, energy, and support you can possibly get, because this is a tall order that you signed up for. It's not an easy journey. I don't think anybody is going to sugarcoat around you and saying like, healthcare? Could you have picked anything harder to tackle on? Couldn't you have something like a little bit easier on anybody's life? But you just had to pick the most potentially difficult endeavor you possibly can. And it sounds like part of that is this is personal.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that personal aspect of it?
I'm building the thing for somebody who's like myself. And the industry, which is what it is, like a business industry, treatment and recovery, is really flawed and super problematic. And if we can do a little bit of work around destigmatizing the shame and mitigating stigma, then we're doing really good work. My mom is in healthcare. My mom's a nurse, and she said she's got to still educate other nurses and doctors when people come in and they'll call them drug seeking. That comes up for my mom at least a couple times a week. And that is crazy to me. Our healthcare and education system around healthcare is not talking about substance use disorder in the way that needs to be happening. And yeah, tall order, but what else would I be doing right now?
Yeah. And I would imagine when something is as personal as it is in the case of what you're doing, the blows also feel harder. Right? The setbacks feel harder. Just talk a little bit to those instances.
It's painful for people to experience on both sides of the disease. So the person struggling with the disease is in a lot of pain and the loved ones are in a lot of pain. So I think when you are trying to educate people around the disease or trying to give advice or help in any way, and you can still just see that people are in pain. An example, I was with the son of this family. I had went and spent some time with them, and their son is in recovery, but they still are in pain from the things that they went through with him, even though he's been in recovery for some time, and would say things like it was his choice and he made his bed and we had to do what we had to do in order to, cut him off from our lives. And I was like, oh boy. And so I really felt for the family because we're in a place that I was once in, being like, I'm still really mad at this loved one. Yeah. And then I was really feeling for the person who's in recovery, saying, I know I was really not a good person in my family at that time, but I still feel like I'm doing so well in my life now. It would be nice if they had acknowledged at all that I was doing better. And it makes me sad that they're not there yet. And I think those are still setbacks that are just, I don't know how to mitigate that from happening, except just getting more content and education out there to people or support for that family. Like, it's clear to me that family did not and still is not getting support for processing what that son went through. The family says, great, we're glad he's in recovery now, but we're just going to push under the rug all the crap that we went through for the last 10 years with him. And we're probably also going to continue to hold it over his head until we maybe have quelled our anger and feelings about it enough. And also, we're not going to talk about it with him. Is that okay to happen? There were moments where I said, well, it is a disease, and I'm happy to have a discussion with you about that, but is that my place? How can I direct them to get the support if they want it and choose to take it? And is that enough? Just being like, there's work out there that would probably help you process, or being okay with everybody's got their own journey. And my opinion is that they will all come to it in time because they really do care about this person.
Right. As you're talking about this, sort of reminds me of the analogy, once again, of the muscle that we talked about earlier, where muscle gets hurt and then it's only when they recover that they grow stronger and they develop, etc. And I think that the key to the recovery is actually nutrition, like education. You need to get the requisite nutrition into yourself to be knowledgeable about those things. But it's also like the hormones. You need insulin and all those things for your muscles to grow. And in that sense, it's like the emotional support that they need to get to be able to develop their own strength in order to support their sons. And probably rest, right? Like you need to sleep before your muscles will eventually grow. These are like the forgotten aspects of development that we think we just go to the gym and we exercise a lot, we work harder and we lift heavier and heavier weights or do more reps. Somehow magically that will develop, when in fact, what really happens is they just tear your muscles up more. And then it's only when you sleep, when you eat, and you get all these hormones into your body that they start to develop. And it sounds like you're facilitating that process and you're being mindful of how to do that in the most graceful way that you know how, because you recognize the sensitivity, the vulnerability, and the nuance and subtlety of the complexity that is involved here. It's not anybody's fault. And you don't want to step on anybody's toes or come across as presumptuous or I'm the expert, so you should listen to me kind of a thing. Because you, more than anybody, knows that's not the way the recovery happened. That's not the way Carly got to the place of strength that she did, nor was it the way in which your parents were able to recover the strength they needed to be able to get to the place they were. Does that resonate?
Yeah, that's totally right. That makes me feel a lot better about it because I feel like it happens often where I'm like, oh man, I like wish I could do something there, but okay, can't save them all.
It's once again, the theme is, where does my responsibility end?
Yeah.
Because first of all, let's acknowledge the fact that you are taking responsibility that not everyone is willing to take. That's already huge, huge. Once again, the tendency for people like yourselves who want to have impact, the boundary between where my responsibility ends, where other people's responsibility begins, it's very blurry because once again, we want to guarantee results. We want them to be better. And for that, I'm thankful and so appreciative of the fact that you're even willing to go on this journey. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it makes me feel, again, like excited that we can make a real difference. It's empowering.
Yeah. So for the purpose of sharing with the audience what this new venture is, would you be willing to say a little bit more about what the service is and how it works, things of that sort?
Sure. It will be community. There'll definitely be group meetings. We think peer-to-peer support is really important. And I believe that there's just a lot more that can happen when a peer is talking to another peer about their experience and how they can get the best help that they can get. So peer-to-peer support. And then I'm developing a program right now. Let's call it a training program. And I'm going to use a model that's called CRAFT, which is community reinforcement and family training. It gives families the tools around positive communication tactics and positive reinforcement tactics, and a little bit around the like letting go process and a lot around the self-care aspect that needs to take place in order for, I think, you to move forward with your loved one and get them the help that they need. And I'm going to launch a pilot program for that, just a really small group of people to see what sort of, things we can learn from that small group of people. Whether it's going to be a niche audience or not is to be determined. And the referral network will build out in Portland first. So it'll be a hub for people to go to and say, here's all the facilities that are here. Here's all the sober living arrangements that are here. These are the places that take this type of insurance. Navigating that in the midst of just trying to get your loved one to a safe place is really challenging, and people just don't know where to go. And I want to build that network out. I would love to build it out, obviously, across the United States. We'll get there, but Portland feels really a great place to start.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like the approach that you're taking this is very healthy in the sense that you want to make sure that you validate this with a small group of people before you jump the gun. So you're doing it in a kind of incremental, significant yet incremental fashion that sort of gives you enough feedback and data to proceed mindfully. And you're doing this really based on relationships because you're starting with the people that you already trust and know, especially in Portland, Maine. You have experienced these people, you trust these people, and there's a genuine sense of community that you're building this on instead of trying to say like, oh, just like all of a sudden nationally launch and we'll just pay some commission to some existing organization somewhere and I'm sure they'll do fine. That's not the way in which you're running this. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And I think the other aspect is that now that we have so many relationships with different facilities here, whether that's because Carly has a personal relationship with them and has brought me in to discuss with these people, a lot of these facilities and sober living arrangements don't have support for families and it's not integrated into the program. And if I can be the go-to person or go-to platform, if we can be that for those facilities, that is a great starting point.
So you're augmenting an existing infrastructure.
I hope so. Yeah.
Wow, that's actually surprising. I would have imagined that the caregiver support would be there already.
Sometimes COVID has also thrown a wrench in that.
Oh, that's true. Right.
And so that's like a whole other challenge, but a lot of facilities just say, nope, we have to focus on the person who's struggling. And that's the end of that story.
Is that because it's not their expertise?
It's that healing for somebody who's just there for 28 days. That's all the capacity that people who are employed at those facilities can handle.
So it's going to get overwhelming if they try to do all the other things. Because earlier you said you have your opinion about 28 days thing. I would imagine that even extending 28 days would already be overwhelming for them.
Totally. And it's expensive. And then we're getting into like insurance not covering anything.
Right. Right.
People are going into debt to get healthy. And then the family is going, I don't even know how to get support for myself right now because I've got to come up with $20,000.
Yeah. Yeah. That's level of anxiety on top of already existing other anxiety and overwhelm. It's sort of like, how am I going to even afford this?
Yeah. So how can we hold the family's hand or the loved one's hand through this process that, again, Carly went to 5 different facilities before she finally went to a place where she stayed 90 days and they had a really great program that worked for her. But prior to that, nobody was helping my parents navigate the system. And maybe it wouldn't have taken Carly 5 different treatment facilities and them paying, I don't even know how much money to get to a place faster for Carly to be, in treatment and feel safe.
Yeah. 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 Wow. Thank you for taking on this enormous task. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. What emotions do you feel at this moment?
Ooh, hungry. That's not. No, I feel super grateful and again, just really happy and excited to have this conversation with you and inspired and on my purpose. I feel really purposeful and that's great. That's a great feeling.
That is the music to my ears. I personally cannot wait until this gets broadcasted and reaches people because I really hope other people hear this story in multiple reasons, like your personal journey of going through. There's so much in there to be had, and the fact and what the work that you're doing and the story of just like normal humanity as we go through different struggles and how we navigate it. And there's just a lot in there. And I'm just so grateful that you were able to be with me today to talk about the story in the way you have done so. Thank you for that.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Absolutely. All right. Until next time, may you stay beautiful. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hey there, listener. Thank you for listening to the very end. I believe we can mature and innovate by navigating the difficult journey of realizing empathy in the face of tension. What I've learned from my own experience is that all of our challenges in empathizing with others is ultimately an opportunity to realize empathy with ourselves, to develop a greater understanding and appreciation of who we are and who we can be when we feel connected. And this journey is difficult. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is especially so if you go at it alone. So I envision a world where each and every one of us, from the moment we're born until the day we die, can feel certain there's at least one person we can reach out to at any given moment who can and will support us in this journey in a way that actually makes us feel supported. If you share this belief, please subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and also like and share this episode, as well as leave a review of our podcast so more people can enjoy it. And if you believe you know somebody who can be a great guest for our show, please send us email at podcast@realizingempathy.com. We absolutely love hearing from you. Thank you once again, and until next time, may you stay beautiful.